Have you ever watched someone you really admire for their intellect? Maybe a brilliant scientist or a sharp financial analyst, someone really strategic.
Uh-huh.
And then they make a decision that just seems, well, illogical, completely off.
Oh, absolutely. It happens all the time. It's a really strange thing, isn't it?
It really is, this paradox.
Yeah.
The human mind can build these incredibly complex systems, right? Think of amazing theories, handle tons of data, and yet we still consistently fall into these systematic errors. It's fascinating. And that's exactly what we're going to dive deep into today. Why brilliant minds make flawed choices, and more importantly, what we can actually do about it.
Welcome to the deep dive. Yeah, our mission today is to really get into the weeds on this. We're aiming for a comprehensive, evidence-based look at debiasing and rational self-regulation.
Right.
And this deep dive, it's not just about pointing out the flaws in how we think. It's about building a really robust, practical portfolio of strategies. We'll look at cognitive approaches, motivational ones, environmental tactics, all grounded in solid research. We're talking randomized controlled trials, big behavioral science reviews, practical metacognitive toolkits. The goal here is to equip you with ways to not just see your own cognitive blind spots, but to actively, optimize how you make decisions, moving from just theory to actually doing something.
And we're definitely going to tackle this systematically, like you'd approach any well-designed system. So first we'll unpack why. Why do even the most logical people stumble? We'll dissect specific cognitive biases, those subtle but really powerful errors that sneak into our thinking. Then we'll build a clear taxonomy, map out the debiasing strategies, understand the different levers we can pull.
Right, the different approaches.
Exactly. Then we'll get into the difference between external nudges, those little pushes designed by others, and this really empowering idea of self-nudging, where you become the architect of your own choices.
That's the key distinction.
Then we'll critically look at the evidence. Do these debiasing efforts actually work? What are their limits? Where have they succeeded?
Yeah, the reality check.
And finally, we'll boil it all down. Practical, actionable techniques you can use for rational self-regulation in your day-to-day life. Think of it as moving from just understanding the problem to building your very own cognitive repair kit, piece by systematic piece. It's something we all see, isn't it? You watch someone smart, or maybe it's even you, and clear logic just goes out the window. It points to something really fundamental about how our brains work. These things we call cognitive biases. What are they at their core?
Well, they're essentially these deeply ingrained systematic errors in thinking. That's the key word, systematic. They're not just random mistakes.
Predictable.
Exactly. Predictable deviations from what you'd call pure logic or objective truth. It's almost like for a mental operating system, powerful as it is, has specific predictable bugs coded right in.
That's a great analogy. So they don't come from like a lack of intelligence.
Not at all. In fact, that's a common misconception. They stem from our mind's reliance on what we call heuristics and intuition.
Heuristics.
Yeah.
Mental shortcuts.
Right. Precisely. Think of them as these super efficient, often automatic algorithms our brain developed. They helped us make quick decisions when things were complex or uncertain.
Like back in evolutionary times.
Exactly. Facing a saber-toothed tiger, you didn't have time for a full logical analysis of escape routes and probabilities. You needed a fast, intuitive reaction. So our brains optimized for speed, efficiency.
Makes sense.
But the problem is, in our modern world, which is unbelievably complex, these same shortcuts, well, they can become real liabilities. While they're still efficient, they can lead us astray. It's like running old software, maybe optimized for a simple task, on a vastly more complicated new problem. It runs fast, sure, but the output, it can be subtly or sometimes very obviously flawed, leading to these predictable errors in judgment.
And these aren't just tiny glitches we're talking about, the consequences. They can be huge, right?
Oh, absolutely. They're far from trivial. We see the impact in serious real-world problems. Think about how biases fuel superstitious beliefs perceiving cause and effect where there's just coincidence, like a lucky pen for an exam.
Yeah, I've known people like that.
Or in medicine, cognitive biases can lead to diagnostic errors, really serious ones. A doctor might latch onto a recent dramatic case and misinterpret current symptoms.
Wow.
They also play a huge, often hidden role in prejudice, distorting how we see and categorize people based on stereotypes, not facts. And then there's the everyday stuff. Poor financial choices, people holding on to losing stocks too long, maybe, or chasing fads based on news stories instead of analysis.
Definitely seen that.
And for a lot of people listening, this is crucial. in innovation, in startups, in investing. These biases can derail even the smartest founders and investors, leading to bad decisions, wasted money, failed ventures.
Which brings us to something really tricky. The bias blind spot. What's that about?
Ah, yes. This is what makes tackling biases so incredibly difficult and, frankly, quite frustrating sometimes. The bias blind spot is this phenomenon where our biases mostly operate unconsciously. We just don't see them happening in ourselves.
We're great at spotting them in other people.
Exactly. We can easily point out a colleague's overconfidence or a friend who only seeks out news confirming their views. But looking inward, recognizing those same patterns in our own thinking, that's incredibly hard.
So overcoming that blind spot. That's step one.
Absolutely crucial. You have to really accept that you are vulnerable too. Doesn't matter how smart you are. Acknowledging that vulnerability is the first critical metacognitive leap. It's an act of intellectual humility, really. You can't fix a bug in your own system if you don't even admit the bug exists. #tag major cognitive biases and their effects.
Okay, so understanding they're pervasive, often unconscious. Let's dig into some of the big ones, the heavy hitters that really mess with clear thinking. How about anchoring bias? Why does that first piece of information just stick so hard?
It's a powerful one. Anchoring bias is this tendency to give way too much weight to the very first thing you hear, the anchor, when you're making judgments or estimates later on.
Even if the anchor is totally random.
Even if it's completely arbitrary or illogical, the mind just seems to grab onto it and doesn't adjust enough afterwards. Think about negotiating a salary or a price. That first offer thrown out, even if it's way too high or low, it sets a benchmark. It pulls the whole conversation towards it. Or consider startup founders. Maybe they get an early optimistic valuation from one angel investor. Or they make a really hopeful timeline early on. They can get anchored to that number or that date. Even when new data comes in, market conditions change, things go wrong internally. They find it incredibly hard to adjust their expectations downwards. That initial anchor just has this gravitational pull, leads to inflated valuations, unrealistic deadlines.
It's like trying to sail away while you're still tied to the dock.
Okay, next up, the availability heuristic. Why do dramatic events feel so much more common than they are?
This one's all about mental retrieval. How easily do examples come to mind? The availability heuristic is our tendency to judge how likely or frequent something is based purely on how readily we can recall examples of it. So if it's easy to remember, we think it happens a lot.
Precisely. Things that are dramatic, vivid, maybe very recent, they stand out in our memory. They're highly available. And so we instinctively assume they must be more common than they really are.
Like a big startup failure that gets tons of press.
Exactly. That dramatic story, the headlines, it feels like it happens all the time, even though statistically it might be relatively rare compared to quiet successes or just fizzling out. It totally skews our perception of risk.
How so?
Well, people consistently overestimate the risk of rare, sensational things. Think plane crashes, shark attacks, terrorism. They dominate the news. They're vivid in our minds.
Right.
Meanwhile, we underestimate common, less dramatic dangers. Car accidents, heart disease, lifestyle health risks. They don't have that same availability in our mental search engine, even though statistically they're far more likely to affect us. Our brain's search function prioritizes drama over data.
And then there's the one I think we all recognize, maybe a bit uncomfortably sometimes, especially now, confirmation bias. What makes us so keen to prove ourselves right and ignore anything that suggests we're wrong?
This taps into something deep. We get real psychological comfort when our beliefs are confirmed, and we feel actual discomfort, cognitive dissonance when they're challenged. It feels bad.
So we avoid that feeling.
We do. Once you've formed an opinion about anything, really, a scientific idea, a product's potential, a political candidate, even why something happened in history, you instinctively, often unconsciously, start looking for information that backs it up.
And the stuff that doesn't fit.
That gets rationalized away, reinterpreted, minimized, or just plain ignored. It's especially dangerous for entrepreneurs, maybe. They might see ambiguous market data and interpret it as strong support, while dismissing negative feedback as just an anomaly. Or maybe the person giving it just doesn't get it.
Yeah, I can see that.
You see it everywhere, throughout history. Leaders picking historical facts to fit a narrative, people sticking to certain scientific ideas by only reading confirming studies. We create these echo chambers that just reinforce what we already think and make genuine learning really hard. It's not passive filtering. It's actively building a world that matches our beliefs.
Okay, let's just pause and recap this quickly. We've set the stage. Cognitive biases are these systematic errors baked into our thinking from using mental shortcuts. We've seen how anchoring traps us with initial info, how availability makes vivid things seem common.
Skewing risk perception.
Right, and crucially, confirmation bias, where we actively hunt for proof we're right and ignore the rest. And all of this happens largely unconsciously, hidden by that tricky bias blind spot. That's the core challenge we've mapped out so far.
And picking up right there, let's talk about the overconfidence effect. This is incredibly common. It's where most of us unjustifiably believe our judgments, our abilities are significantly better than they actually are.
It's not just bragging.
No, it's a genuine miscalibration. We feel more certain, more competent than the objective evidence really supports.
Like how almost everyone thinks they're an above-average driver.
That's the classic example. Statistically impossible, but that's what people report. And a specific, often very costly type of overconfidence is the planning fallacy.
Ah, yes, underestimating how long things take.
Exactly. We consistently underestimate the time, the cost, the risks involved in future tasks, even tasks we've done before. And at the same time, we overestimate the benefits.
Where does this hit hard?
Startups, project management. It's huge.
Ugh.
Overly optimistic financial forecasts, timelines that are way too short, not enough planning for things going wrong. It leads directly to missed deadlines, blown budgets, projects failing. It's this deep belief that, okay, maybe it usually takes longer, but this time for my project, it'll be different, ignoring all the base rates.
Then there's the flip side, looking back. Hindsight bias. The I knew it all along effect.
Yes. After something happens, a success, a failure, a market crash, whatever, we look back and see it as having been totally predictable, obvious even, when at the time it really wasn't.
And that messes up learning, right?
Terribly. If you look back at a failure and think, oh, that was obvious, you don't properly analyze the real complex, uncertain factors that actually caused it. You don't learn the right lessons because you've mentally erased the genuine uncertainty you felt before the event.
So you think you're better at predicting than you are.
Exactly. It can make you overly sure of your predictive abilities going forward, setting you up for the same mistakes again. Think of a sports fan after a big upset saying, oh, I knew they'd win, even if they were betting on the other team just hours before. The messy reality of the past uncertainty just gets wiped clean.
Our brains also love categories, maybe too much sometimes. Which brings us to representativeness bias, judging things based on stereotypes.
Pretty much. It's judging the probability of something based on how much it resembles a prototype, a stereotype, or a familiar pattern, rather than looking at the actual statistical likelihood, the base rate. We get seduced by a good story or a neat pattern over the cold, hard numbers.
Can you give an example?
A classic is the conjunction fallacy. In a famous study, people read a description of Linda smart, outspoken, consumed with social justice. Then they were asked which was more likely. Linda is a bank teller, or Linda is a bank teller and a feminist.
And people chose the second one.
Many did, because the description of Linda seemed more representative of a feminist stereotype. Even though, logically, the probability of two things happening together, teller and feminist, can never be higher than the probability of just one of those things happening, Valor.
Oh, okay.
In investing, you see this when people back a startup because the founder just seems like the next Zuckerberg. They fit the stereotype. Even though the statistical base rates for startups like that are actually really poor, the vivid story, the representative prototype, overrides the statistics.
And sticking with how we process information, what about the framing effect? How the presentation changes everything.
It's incredibly powerful. It shows how our decisions aren't always purely logical. They're influenced by the frame. The framing effect is how the way information is presented. The framing drastically changes our decision, even if the underlying facts are identical.
Like the 75% lean versus 25% fat meat.
Exactly the same information. But 75% lean sounds much better and sells more. Your choices about health, money, products, they can completely flip depending on whether something is framed positively, highlighting gains, or negatively, highlighting losses.
So how you pitch something matters as much as what you're pitching.
Often, yes. It shows how language and presentation shape our perception and choices, independently of the objective content. A purely logical analysis would reach the same conclusion regardless of the frame, but that's often not how our minds work.
Our brains are also pattern-matching machines, sometimes seeing patterns where there aren't any. That's illusory correlation.
That's it. Our pattern-seeking drive goes into overdrive, even with random data. We perceive relationships, connections, causes where none actually exist. This leads to superstitions, flawed causal beliefs.
Like a lucky charm actually causing success.
Or a manager thinking some new ritual caused a sales spike when it was really just market trends. There was a classic experiment where people saw random data about patients recovering or not, and some fictitious drug being given or not. They came away convinced the drug worked. They selectively noticed the times recovery happened after the drug was given and assumed a cause-effect link, even though the data was totally random, no actual connection.
So we create stories even from noise.
We do. It happens in business, crediting the wrong factor for success. In medicine, believing ineffective treatments work. Our brain wants a narrative.
Okay, one more major one that really affects groups and organizations. Authority bias. Giving too much weight to the boss's opinion.
Or any authority figure, yeah. It's our tendency to assign greater accuracy or value to an opinion just because it comes from someone in a position of authority, regardless of their actual expertise on that specific topic.
So the CEO's idea gets treated as gold, even if it's outside their expertise.
Exactly. Or a famous investor's comment on something unrelated to finance. Their perceived status gives their words unearned weight. This can shut down dissent, lead to groupthink. People hesitate to challenge the expert, even if their own analysis suggests the authority figure is wrong.
So decisions get skewed just based on who said it.
Precisely. It undermines critical evaluation. You see it in boardrooms, scientific communities. Sometimes deference to big names can slow down progress if their views are flawed but unchallenged. It's about social dynamics overriding objective assessment.
And you mentioned, this isn't even the full list, right? There are others, like preferring things just because we've seen them before.
The mere exposure effect, yeah. Or zero risk bias, where we irrationally want to eliminate a tiny risk completely, even if it means ignoring much bigger risks elsewhere. The list goes on.
But these ones we've covered are really the big ones affecting major decisions.
They cover a lot of ground, yes. Entrepreneurship, finance, health, daily life. And what's really striking and sobering is just how pervasive they are. They feel natural, like common sense, mostly unconscious.
And being smart or expert doesn't make you immune.
Definitely not. Experts fall prey all the time. And people can be incredibly confident in their biased decisions, even when they theoretically know about biases, and even when they lack any real evidence for their choice.
Wow.
It just shows how deep-rooted these patterns are. And because they can lead to such bad outcomes in really important areas, medicine, law, business, many psychologists argue that finding effective ways to de-bias ourselves might be one of the most crucial contributions science can make to human well-being. It's not just academic, it's deeply practical.
Okay, let's consolidate this first big chunk. We've seen that cognitive biases are these systematic thinking errors, often born from useful mental shortcuts. We talked about the huge hurdle of the bias blind spot, easy to see in others, hard in ourselves. Then we unpacked a whole list of major biases. Let's run through them like mental flashcards. First, anchoring bias, getting stuck on the first piece of information. Then, availability heuristic, judging likelihood by how easily examples pop into your head.
Vividness over statistics.
Confirmation bias, the big one, actively seeking info that confirms what you already believe, ignoring the rest.
Building our own reality.
Overconfidence effect, thinking we're better or more accurate than we are, which includes the planning fallacy, underestimating time and cost.
Always thinking this time will be different.
Hindsight bias, the I knew it all along trap, which kills learning from the past.
Makes the unpredictable seem obvious after the fact.
Representativeness bias, judging based on stereotypes or prototypes, ignoring base rates, includes the conjunction fallacy.
The allure of a good story over data.
Framing effect, where the presentation, not the content, changes your decision.
75% lean versus 25% fat.
Illusory correlation, seeing patterns and causal links where there's only randomness or coincidence.
Our pattern-seeking brain working overtime.
And finally, authority bias, giving undue weight to opinions just because they come from someone in charge.
Even if they're outside their expertise. This is a great checklist. Understanding these is absolutely the foundation for building a more rational approach. Okay, so if these biases are so deeply ingrained, almost like features of our mental hardware, the next big question is obvious. What do we do about them? How do we actually fight back? How do we stop tripping over these common errors?
Right, that's where the solutions come in. How do we actively de-bias our thinking? Generally, interventions fall into three broad categories based on how they try to fix or prevent biased thinking.
What are they?
The classic taxonomy is motivational, cognitive, and environmental strategies. Sometimes you hear environmental called technological or contextual, but it's the same idea.
Okay, motivational, cognitive, environmental.
Yeah. And what's really important is that each one targets a different part of the decision process. Are we tackling effort, mental skills, or the situation itself. They often work best together, giving you a much more complete toolkit than just one approach alone.
Let's start with motivational strategies. What's the core idea there? Is it just about trying harder?
In a way, yes. It's about incentivizing less biased thinking. The idea is to boost the decision-maker's effort, or maybe their sense of accountability. It works on the premise that sometimes biases creep in because of, well, cognitive laziness. We default to shortcuts because we don't feel motivated enough to do the hard, slow, careful thinking the system to work.
So how do you motivate that?
By raising the stakes, making the decision matter more to the person. For instance, requiring people to formally justify their choices to a boss, a committee, even just their peers, that's accountability.
Having to explain yourself makes you more careful.
Exactly. Research shows that when people know they'll have to explain their reasoning, they process information more thoroughly, they consider more angles, they tend to be less biased. It's a well-studied effect.
What else? Rewards and punishments.
Yep. Directly tying decisions to rewards for good outcomes or costs for errors can definitely prompt more effort. Imagine bonuses for project managers who give accurate forecasts, not just optimistic ones.
Okay. But are there limits? Can motivation fix everything?
Definitely not. That's crucial. Motivational tools aren't cure-alls. If the bias comes from a genuine lack of knowledge, like not understanding statistics or using a flawed mental strategy, just trying harder won't help. You can't motivate someone to use a skill they don't possess.
Right.
And sometimes incentives can even backfire. If they're designed badly, they might accidentally reward a biased approach, maybe rewarding confidence over accuracy, leading someone to double down on their mistake. So motivation helps most when the problem is lack of effort or attention, not lack of skill.
Okay, so if motivation boosts effort, cognitive strategies are about boosting skill, changing how people actually think.
Precisely. This approach involves giving people training, knowledge, or specific tools, decision aids, to fundamentally improve their judgment. It treats biased thinking like a skill deficit. The idea is, with the right mental tools, people can learn to recognize and correct their biases.
What kinds of tools are we talking about?
A big part is training and education. This can range from teaching basic statistical literacy, really getting concepts like regression to the mean, sample size, probability, to teaching specific analysis techniques.
Like what?
Like training people to actively consider the alternative. This means consciously forcing yourself to look for reasons why your initial hunch might be wrong.
Asking.
What else could explain this? Or what evidence would prove me wrong and where can I find it?
Directly fighting confirmation bias.
Exactly. It forces a more balanced search for information. Another powerful cognitive tool is using structured decision aids. These are things like checklists, algorithms, step-by-step frameworks that guide you through a less biased process.
Like pilots use checklists.
Perfect example. Or think about simple formulas outperforming human intuition in hiring decisions. They remove subjective biases. Checklists in medicine and aviation have dramatically reduced errors by forcing people to consider all factors, overriding potentially flawed intuition or memory. They act like cognitive scaffolding, supporting better thinking.
All right, a quick check-in here. We've laid out the first two main categories for tackling biases. First, motivational strategies, using incentives and accountability to boost the will to think carefully. Second, cognitive strategies, using training, tools like consider the alternative, and structured aids to build the skill for more rational thought. They target different aspects, effort versus ability.
And cognitive strategies can go even deeper, right? You mentioned metacognition earlier, thinking about your own thinking. How does that work as a debiasing tool?
Metacognition is incredibly powerful. It's about turning your analytical lens inward. You can borrow techniques from things like cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, to learn to spot common distortions in your own thoughts and then actively challenge them.
Like setting up mental checks?
Exactly. Building in routine mental checkpoints during important decisions, you pause and ask yourself, okay, what assumptions am I making here? Am I only seeing confirming evidence? Am I letting emotions cloud my judgment? Practicing this kind of self-questioning strengthens that deliberate System 2 oversight. It helps you catch yourself falling into a bias before it fully takes hold.
Yeah.
There are even some newer training methods where they deliberately induce a bias in you during an exercise.
Seriously?
Yeah, and then they immediately show you how you were fooled. See, that's the planning fallacy right there. Your intuition tricked you. It's a powerful firsthand experience that can really break through the bias blind spot and make you more receptive to using these techniques later.
Wow, that sounds effective.
The overall goal of these cognitive strategies is to instill lasting, better thinking habits or provide mental models that help you align your judgments more closely with reality, even when your gut instinct wants to take a shortcut.
Okay, so that covers motivation and cognition. The third category is environmental or structural strategies. This shifts the focus away from changing the person to changing the context.
Precisely. Instead of re-educating you or motivating you, the idea here is to redesign the decision environment itself, or how information is presented, to subtly guide people toward better, less biased choices. You engineer the world to minimize bias triggers.
And the classic example here is nudges.
Right, absolutely. Nudges are these small, subtle changes in choice architecture that steer decisions without forcing anyone or limiting choices significantly. Setting a good option as a default is a prime example.
Like automatic retirement savings enrollment.
Perfect. People tend to stick with the default because of inertia, the status quo bias. So making the beneficial choice the default dramatically increases uptake. Same with opt-out organ donation systems versus opt-in.
What about how information is presented?
That's another key environmental strategy. Think about traffic light. Food labels, red, amber, green for nutrition. They make complex information instantly salient and easy to grasp. That reduces the cognitive load and cuts down on judgment errors you might make if you had to analyze a complex nutrition panel yourself.
So you're making the environment do the work.
Essentially, yes. You're structuring the context so that our natural, sometimes lazy heuristics are actually more likely to lead us to the right choice without requiring us to become perfectly rational beings overnight.
It's like paving the path for the best choice, making it the easiest one to take.
That's a great way to put it. And this extends into technological aids and more complex choice architecture. Think about decision support systems in medicine, the alerts doctors get about potential drug interactions.
Right, the computer flags it.
The system doesn't teach the doctor a new skill in that moment. It intervenes right at the decision point to prevent a potential bias, like a memory lapse or overlooking something. Or consider software that blocks distracting websites during work hours a structural forcing function. These tools don't necessarily change you fundamentally, but they change the context to limit opportunities for bias or to channel your behavior in better ways. Simple things like recommended settings in software installers or a finance app warning you about panic selling during market dips, those are all environmental tweaks.
Shaping the landscape of choices.
Exactly.
It seems pretty clear that none of these strategies, motivational, cognitive, environmental, is the whole answer on its own. They all have strengths, weaknesses, but they sound like they could work really well together.
Absolutely. Critical point. They are often highly complementary. You can use this analogy. Motivational strategies spark the will to be rational. Cognitive strategies build the skill to reason better, and environmental strategies adjust the world so even our flawed instincts get guided correctly.
Will, skill, and world. I like that.
So a truly comprehensive debiasing approach, maybe in an organization or even for yourself, would likely combine elements of all three. Imagine a company using accountability rules for major decisions, motivational, running workshops on statistical thinking and checklists, cognitive, and building smart defaults or nudges into their software systems, environmental. That integrated, multi-pronged strategy is usually the most robust way to foster consistently better decision-making.
Okay, recapping Chapter 2. We've got this taxonomy of debiasing strategies. First, motivational. Boosting effort and care through things like incentives and accountability, making people want to be more careful.
Right, igniting the will.
Second, cognitive. Changing how people think, equipping them with skills through training, tools like consider the alternative, structured aids, and metacognition thinking about your thinking.
Building the skill.
And third, environmental or structural, redesigning the decision context itself, using nudges, defaults, smart information presentation, technological aids to guide behavior.
Adjusting the world.
Got it. These three working together offer a really holistic way to tackle bias. Now, building on those strategies is a really important distinction we need to make. It gets right to the heart of agency, really. It's about who is actually doing the debiasing. Is it someone else acting on you, or is it you taking control?
That's a crucial question. It brings up this idea of external versus internal agency in debiasing. Let's start with traditional external nudges.
Okay.
These are, well, exactly what they sound like. They're designed and put in place by external agents, policymakers, maybe product designers, HR departments, experts. Their goal is to gently steer people's decisions in a better direction, often without the person even consciously realizing they're being nudged.
Like the automatic retirement enrollment you mentioned.
Perfect example. HR sets it up, leveraging inertia, and savings rates go up. Or a cafeteria putting fruit at eye level and hiding the desserts. Someone else designed that environment to influence choice.
And these work.
They can be very effective, especially for broad, immediate changes. But they do raise questions, don't they, about autonomy and about long-term learning. If you only make the better choice because the environment was set up that way, have you actually learned to make better choices yourself in a different situation? Or are you just better off in that specific context?
Right. Which leads us to the other side, self-nudging. This sounds much more empowering.
It absolutely is.
Wow.
This is a newer idea, really championed by researchers like Ralph Hertwig. Here, the individual becomes their own choice architect. It's a much more transparent, autonomous way to change behavior. You're not being nudged. You are consciously deciding to nudge yourself.
How does that work in practice?
It's about empowering people to deliberately structure their own surroundings, their digital life, their habits, to align with their own reflective, long-term goals. Think about digital distractions again. Instead of relying on, say, YouTube to nudge you to take a break, an external nudge, self-nudging means you proactively install your own website blocker. You disable notifications. You set a rule like no phone in the bedroom after 10 and physically put the phone elsewhere. You are actively engineering your environment.
Taking control.
Exactly. There was a great paper that put it as empower users to become choice architects of their own proximate environment. It's about resisting temptation not just through sheer willpower, which often fails, but through smart, proactive design of your personal world based on knowing your own weaknesses.
Okay, let me make sure I've got this. External nudges. Someone else shapes your choices, often subtly, maybe invisibly. Self-nudges. You proactively engineer your own environment or set up your own rules. It feels like a fundamental difference in who holds the power, who has the agency.
Precisely. And that difference leads to this core concept of steering versus boosting. External nudges primarily steer behavior. They use cues, defaults, environmental tweaks to guide you. Like the cafeteria example, you eat more fruit, maybe without even thinking about why. The outcome is achieved, but your underlying skill or understanding might not change much.
Okay, so steering is guidance without necessarily insight.
Right. In contrast, boosts, which is often used alongside self-nudging, aim to equip the person. They provide knowledge, skills, tools, so you can make better choices yourself, autonomously. This approach treats people as active agents capable of learning about biases and self-correcting.
It's more about building competence.
Exactly. Hertwig and others argue that while nudges can be good for immediate fixes, boosting builds long-term competence, critical thinking, and respects autonomy because it's transparent and voluntary. It's about fostering wisdom, not just compliance.
But surely both have their place. It's not either.
Oh, absolutely not mutually exclusive. They both have merit. A government might use nudges for something like tax compliance simplifying forms, maybe. That's an environmental tweak. And they might also run educational campaigns about financial planning. That's a cognitive boost.
Oh.
The key is knowing when a simple nudge is enough for a societal goal versus when empowering the individual is better for long-term change and personal growth. But from your perspective as an individual, learning to self-nudge is incredibly powerful. It gives you direct control.
Wow.
It means cultivating habits like deliberately designing your workspace for focus, setting up specific reminder systems, pre-committing to things like automatic transfers to savings. You're using your own knowledge of your triggers, your weaknesses. You're basically child-proofing your choices for your future self, knowing that future you might be tired, impulsive, distracted.
Like Odysseus and the Sirens.
The perfect analogy. Odysseus binding himself to the mast is a classic pre-commitment device. It's a form of self-nudging. He constrained his present self's freedom because he knew his future self would be vulnerable to temptation, all for a higher future goal. That's rational self-regulation in action.
But it all relies on wanting to do it in the first place, right? That willingness to look inward and take charge.
It really does. This whole distinction between nudge and self-nudge boils down to who is acting and why. External nudges change the world for you, often invisibly. Self-nudging empowers you to change your own world or your own thought processes transparently. You learn to guide yourself instead of just being guided.
And that's crucial for new situations.
Incredibly important. When you face a novel challenge where no one has designed a nudge for you, the ability to self-nudge, to architect your own solution is vital. But as researchers point out, it works best for those who are already motivated enough to actively intervene in their own choice architecture. It assumes that willingness to introspect and self-regulate, we talked about earlier, linking back to motivational factors. When you have that drive, self-nudging becomes a cornerstone of managing yourself rationally.
All right, let's wrap up Chapter 3 with our flashcards on this nudge versus self-nudge distinction. First, external nudge. Designed by others to steer your behavior, often unconsciously. Think automatic enrollment, cafeteria layouts.
Someone else is the architect.
Then self-nudge boost, where you act as your own choice architect, proactively shaping your environment, habits, or thinking. Website blockers you install yourself, personal rules.
You're the architect.
We talked about steering versus boosting. Steering guides behavior without needing insight. Boosting equips you with knowledge or tools for autonomous choice.
Guidance versus empowerment.
And remember the Odysseus analogy. Pre-commitment as a powerful form of self-nudging, constraining yourself now for a future benefit.
Tying yourself to the mast. That's a great set of concepts focusing on agency and taking control. Okay, so we've got the biases, we've got the strategies, motivational, cognitive, environmental, even self-nudging. But now, the really hard question, the reality check. Do these debiasing efforts actually work? Do they make a real difference in the messy real world? Or is it mostly just theory?
This is where we have to be really honest about the research findings over the years. The truth is, researchers have had only mixed success. It's proven quite difficult to find methods that consistently produce large, lasting, and broadly applicable improvements in decision-making.
So they work sometimes, but not always, or not everywhere.
Exactly. Many interventions look great in a controlled lab study, but then the effects diminish over time. They don't stick. Or, even more commonly, they fail to transfer. The skill learned in one specific context just doesn't carry over to a different new situation.
So there's no magic debiasing vaccine?
Unfortunately, no. That would be the ideal, wouldn't it? One shot and you're immune to bias everywhere. But the reality is much more like, well, like a specific treatment for a specific bias in a specific setting. It helps there, but it offers limited generalization to other biases or other parts of your life. It's targeted, not universal.
And the big reviews of the research, they reflect this caution. I remember reading about a big systematic review from 2021.
You're right. That 2021 review looked specifically at debiasing training interventions and asked, do the effects last and do they transfer? Their conclusion was pretty stark, actually. They found insufficient evidence that bias mitigation interventions will substantially help people make better decisions in real-life conditions.
Insufficient evidence. That sounds pretty negative.
Well, let's unpack that. They found that out of hundreds of studies, only 12 even tried to test if the effects lasted beyond a couple of weeks, or if they transferred to new tasks or domains. Just 12.
Wow, that's not many.
Not at all. And even among those few, the results weren't strong or consistent. For example, maybe a training game helps you avoid the sunk cost fallacy in a simulated investment decision within the game. But that same person might still be massively overconfident when making a health decision or show strong confirmation bias discussing politics. The skill didn't transfer across domains. The brain seems to keep things in separate boxes.
So just to quickly summarize where we are on effectiveness, the evidence points to debiasing interventions can work, yes, but their impact is often narrow. It's context-specific. They don't easily jump to new situations, and the effects often fade without ongoing reinforcement. It's not that universal vaccine we might wish for.
And this idea of skills not transferring, it fits with a broader finding in cognitive science, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That expertise tends to be narrow. You can be a genius in one area, but still biased in others.
Precisely. It's a classic finding. A fantastic example is professional weather forecasters. They become incredibly well calibrated at predicting rain. Why? Because they get constant practice and immediate clear feedback. Did it rain or not?
Right. Very direct feedback loop.
Exactly. So they get really good at that specific task. But studies show these same expert forecasters are just as prone to overconfidence on general knowledge questions or predicting things outside meteorology as anyone else.
So mastering probabilities for weather doesn't make you generally unbiased.
Apparently not, automatically. Mastering thinking in one domain doesn't just magically rewire your brain for all domains. There is maybe one interesting exception or nuance.
Oh.
Training in fields that heavily emphasize statistics, methodology, critical thinking, like advanced psychology, maybe philosophy of science. Rigorous data analysis has been linked to more general improvements in logical reasoning and bias awareness.
So learning the principles of good reasoning might transfer better.
That seems to be the suggestion. It's perhaps about learning the meta skills of how to think critically, rather than just fixing one specific bias in one context.
Okay. But despite these challenges at the individual level, some people, like Steven Pinker in Enlightenment, now take a much more optimistic, bigger picture view, right? He argues humanity is getting better at overcoming biases.
Yes, Pinker makes a strong case from a historical macro perspective. He argues that despite our innate flaws, tribalism, magical thinking, etc., the overall story of human progress shows our capacity to overcome these things through reason, science, and building better institutions.
How so?
He points out that educated populations today are less susceptible to many blatant biases that were common in the past. Think widespread belief in witchcraft, maybe certain overt prejudices. He sees things like fact-checking, scientific peer review, legal systems, widespread statistical literacy as huge societal-level debiasing mechanisms.
The Enlightenment Project, broadly speaking, is winning.
That's his argument, that systematically applying reason and evidence does push back against our cognitive vices in the long run. But importantly, even Pinker admits this progress is like swimming upstream. It goes against the strong currents of human nature.
Which brings us back to the cognitive science evidence.
Exactly. The micro-level evidence on debiasing individuals remains challenging. There seem to be real ceilings on how much improvement you can get from typical interventions. Biases can be reduced, their impact lessened, yes, but eradicated. Current science suggests probably not. Our brains evolved with these shortcuts.
Okay, so eradication is off the table, but reduction is possible.
Yeah.
What are the success stories? Where have we seen real lasting impact, even if it's not universal?
There are definitely notable successes. A really important set of studies by Morwidge and colleagues in 2015 is a great example. They used intensive training, delivered via engaging interactive computer games that gave immediate feedback.
And what did they find?
They found significant reductions, over 30% in several biases, like anchoring, confirmation bias, right after the training. And remarkably, the effect was still there, around 20% reduction 3 months later. That shows durable benefits across multiple biases from a single, well-designed intervention.
What was the key? Why did that work better?
The key seems to be that it has to be engaging, interactive, targeted, and provide feedback. Just passively reading about biases or getting generic advice, that usually doesn't stick or transfer well.
What about checklists? You mentioned those earlier.
Yes, structured checklists and decision protocols are another huge success story, especially in high-stakes areas like aviation and surgery. They effectively eliminate certain types of errors, memory lapses, skipping steps, overconfidence in routine tasks by forcing a systematic process. But again, their power is often tightly focused on specific tasks, specific contexts, not a general thinking upgrade.
So putting it all together, debiasing isn't a quick fix. It takes ongoing work.
Absolutely. One-time interventions tend to fade. Skills learned in one place don't automatically jump to others unless you consciously recognize the underlying principle and practice applying it. It takes persistent effort, reinforcement.
Which explains why environmental strategies, the nudges, are so appealing. If you can't perfect the person, fix the context.
Exactly. If achieving perfect human unbiasedness is unreliable, then shaping the environment to make the good choice, the easy choice, yields more consistent results. But for us as individuals wanting to improve, understanding these limits is actually empowering. It means treating biases not as a disease to be cured, but as a lifelong condition to be managed.
Like managing physical fitness.
Perfect analogy. It requires ongoing practice, vigilance. Knowing biases are deep-rooted keeps us from getting complacent. The saying, forewarned is forearmed, is very relevant here. Rational self-regulation is a continuous practice, not a one-time cure.
Okay, let's recap Chapter 4, our reality check on debiasing effectiveness.
Oh.
First, debiasing effectiveness is mixed. Success is often narrow, with limited transfer to new situations and effects fading over time.
Right. No magic bullet.
The 2021 review highlighted this, finding insufficient real-life evidence, mainly due to few long-term or transfer studies.
A critical gap in the research.
We saw that narrow expertise is common. Skills in one area, like weather forecasting, don't automatically make you unbiased elsewhere, though broad training in reasoning principles might help more.
Learning the meta skills seems key.
Pinker's optimism offers a macro view. Societal progress via reason and science does push back against biases over the long haul.
A hopeful perspective on collective rationality.
But empirical limits are real at the individual level. Biases can be reduced, yes, but not eradicated. There are ceilings on improvement.
We have to be realistic.
Still, there are successes. Targeted, engaging training like the Morwidge study showed durable effects. And structured checklists are highly effective for specific tasks.
Proof that progress is possible with the right methods.
So the key takeaway: debiasing requires ongoing practice, vigilance, and awareness of limits. It's a continuous management process.
This sets us up perfectly for the final chapter. What does that ongoing practice actually look like?
All right, we've journeyed through the theory, what biases are, the strategies to fight them, the evidence on whether they work. Now let's get really practical. Let's build that personal cognitive repair toolkit. What are the concrete evidence-based techniques you can start using today to regulate yourself and make more rational decisions?
This is where it all comes together. The best techniques often cleverly blend those motivational, cognitive, and environmental insights we discussed, making them genuinely actionable for personal use. We can highlight several proven methods you can integrate into your life.
Let's start with something that sounds like therapy, but for thinking. Cognitive restructuring and metacognitive check-ins. Borrowing from CBT to challenge our own thoughts.
Exactly. It's about developing that internal critic, or maybe better, an internal coach. When you catch yourself having a really strong gut feeling or belief, I just know this plan will work, that's your cue. Your cue to deliberately consider the opposite.
Actively look for the flaws.
Actively ask, how could this fail? What evidence would prove me wrong? What am I maybe ignoring? It forces you to slow down that fast, intuitive system 1 and engage system 2, engaging with disconfirming information. Another powerful technique is adopting the outside view. Instead of getting lost in the unique details of your situation, which often fuels overconfidence.
Right. My situation is different.
Exactly. Instead, step back. Treat your situation like it's someone else's problem, or just another data point in a larger set. Ask, statistically, how often do ventures like this actually succeed, regardless of how special mine feels?
So you use base rates.
Precisely. It directly counters that inside you optimism and the tendency to neglect base rates. These aren't just vague ideas. You can turn them into mental checklists for big decisions. Have I considered the opposite? Have I taken the outside view? Initially, it feels a bit forced, maybe, but with practice, it becomes more automatic. You develop this inner voice that flags potential biases.
That makes sense. What about techniques that involve imagining scenarios? I think you mentioned perspective taking and premortems earlier.
Yes, these are fantastic for challenging assumptions and expanding your view. The premortem is particularly powerful. You get your team together or just do it yourself.
And you imagine failure before you start.
Exactly. Assume the project has already failed spectacularly. Then brainstorm all the plausible reasons why it might have failed. It's counterintuitive, but it brilliantly opens your mind to risks and negative outcomes that optimism or hindsight bias might otherwise hide.
So you simulate failure safely.
Right. It makes you much more receptive to identifying and mitigating real risks up front. Similarly, actively taking others' perspectives is huge for reducing egocentric biases or social biases like prejudice.
How do you do that?
You could literally role-play as your opponent in a negotiation, trying to articulate their viewpoint as strongly and empathetically as possible. What are their legitimate goals or concerns? Doing this has been shown to reduce stereotyping.
So it's all about breaking out of your own default viewpoint.
Fundamentally, yes. Expanding your frame of reference. Using techniques like red teaming, assigning someone to argue against your plan, or just asking, what would my most objective mentor advise here? These are all ways to shift perspective and correct for one-sided thinking.
Okay, so our toolkit is growing. We've got these active mental drills, metacognitive check-ins like challenging assumptions with consider the opposite and using the outside view for objectivity. And then perspective shifting tools like the premortem to anticipate failure realistically. These really feel like active exercises in self-regulation.
And now for a strategy that tackles both unrealistic thinking and the gap between planning and doing. Mental contrasting plus implementation intentions, often called MCII. This is a really well-researched two-part strategy proven to help turn goals into action while keeping you grounded.
Okay, 2 parts. Mental contrasting and implementation intentions. How do they work together?
First, mental contrasting. You start by vividly imagining your desired future. Really picture it, the success, the positive feelings, the outcomes. Make it sensory, detailed.
Okay, positive visualization.
Then, immediately after that positive visualization, you vividly imagine the main obstacle in reality standing between you and that future. The biggest hurdle.
So you contrast the dream with the reality.
Exactly. You juxtapose the fantasy with the obstacle. This is crucial. Research, especially by Gabriel Oettingen, shows that positive visualization alone can actually decrease motivation. You feel like you've already achieved something just by dreaming.
Really? That's counterintuitive.
It is. But when you add the contrast, confronting the real obstacle, it generates a much more realistic and ultimately more motivating mindset. It energizes you to overcome the specific challenge you identified. It's not negative. It's realistic preparation.
Okay, so contrasting gives you realistic motivation. What's the second part? Implementation intentions.
Once you've identified that key obstacle via mental contrasting, you create an implementation intention. This is a very specific if-then plan. It links a situation or trigger, the if, with a concrete action you'll take to overcome the obstacle, the then.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Let's say your obstacle to writing a report is feeling dread. Your plan might be, if I start feeling dread about the report, then I will immediately spend just 5 minutes outlining the first paragraph. Or for sales calls, if it's 3 p.m. and I haven't made a call, then I will immediately dial client X.
So you pre-plan your response to the trigger.
Precisely. You preload the action. It makes the desired behavior more automatic when the cue appears. It helps you break out of default bad habits, procrastination due to present bias, avoidance due to fear because you bypass the need for in-the-moment willpower. You've already decided what you'll do when.
In this MCII combination, there's solid evidence it works.
Very solid. Across many domains, health, academics, productivity. A big meta-analysis covering over 15,000 people found MCII reliably improves goal achievement. The effect is even stronger when people actively practice it with guidance, not just read about it.
How would you use it practically, say, for reading more?
Okay, goal. Read more scientific papers. Positive outcome. Visualize feeling knowledgeable, making informed decisions. Obstacle. Get home tired, grab phone, scroll social media. Then the if-then plan. If I finish dinner, then I will spend 30 minutes reading papers before checking my phone or watching TV.
You can even use a template.
Yeah, the simple template. If trigger situation, then I will effective response. This becomes your personal debiasing tool. Mental contrasting debiases the rosy optimism, and the if-then plan debiases the gap between wanting to do something and actually doing it.
That feels incredibly structured and actionable. And speaking of action and environment, let's link back to habit redesign and environmental self-nudging, using our surroundings to help us.
Absolutely. This is where you become your own choice architect in the physical or digital world. If you struggle with present bias, always choosing immediate comfort over long-term goals, you can use commitment devices and environmental tweaks.
Like making bad choices harder.
Exactly. Increase friction for bad habits. Set up your workspace to minimize distractions. Maybe use website blockers during deep work. Put the junk food on a high shelf. Make your impulsive system one work harder to get it.
And decrease friction for good habits.
Right. Lay out your running clothes the night before. Keep healthy snacks easily accessible. You're not relying on willpower. You're changing the context to support your reflective goals. Over time, these become habits, effectively outsourcing self-control to your environment.
So just to quickly connect those points, we've seen how MCII provides a powerful structure for overcoming internal obstacles and translating intentions into actions. And we've revisited self-nudging through habit redesign, which focuses on shaping your external environment to make your desired behaviors easier and undesired ones harder. Both are about proactively setting yourself up for success internally and externally.
Okay, one last major technique. You mentioned earlier that biases often persist because we don't get clear feedback or we don't reflect on it. How can reflection and feedback journaling help?
This is absolutely fundamental for calibration and long-term learning. It's a practice used by those super forecasters who achieve remarkable accuracy. The idea is simple but powerful.
What do you do?
Whenever you make a significant prediction or decision, a business forecast, an investment choice, even just estimating how long a project will take you, write down your reasoning. What evidence did you use? What were your expectations? Be specific.
Okay, you document your thinking.
Yes. And then, crucially, later on, you revisit that entry. You compare the actual outcome to what you initially thought.
What does that achieve?
It creates a personalized feedback loop. It reveals your specific patterns of bias. You might notice, wow, I was way too confident about that timeline again. Or I consistently ignored evidence that contradicted my initial hypothesis here. It gives you hard data on yourself, fighting hindsight bias, and fostering genuine self-awareness.
So you create your own feedback when the world doesn't provide it clearly.
Exactly. Timely, honest feedback is essential for learning. Often we have to manufacture it. Things like participating in forecasting tournaments, or even making small, friendly bets on your predictions. They make you accountable and provide concrete feedback. Losing a $5 bet on when a project will finish could be a very memorable lesson about the planning fallacy.
So putting all these practical tools together, it's not about finding the one magic technique, is it?
Not at all. No single tool is a panacea. The real goal of rational self-regulation isn't to achieve impossible, perfect unbiasedness. It's to systematically reduce the impact of bias on your important decisions and behaviors.
Building a repertoire.
Exactly. You build a toolkit. You use implementation intentions to follow through on plans despite urges. You use consider the opposite or premortems to make better decisions by broadening your view. You use self-nudging to shape your environment. You use journaling for feedback and calibration. Combining these approaches, practicing them consistently, that's how you genuinely improve judgment and achieve better outcomes. It's about becoming a more skilled manager of your own mind.
Okay, let's consolidate this final chapter, our practical toolkit for rational self-regulation. Here are the flashcards. First, cognitive restructuring. Actively challenging your biased thoughts. Using tools like consider the opposite and the outside view.
Training your inner critic.
Perspective taking, seeing things from other angles. Role-playing, red teaming, imagining mentor advice.
Expanding your frame.
The premortem. Imagining failure beforehand to identify risks and counter optimism.
Safe simulation of failure.
MCII, mental contrasting plus implementation intentions. That powerful combo visualizing goal and obstacle, then making specific if-then plans.
Bridging the intention-action gap.
Habit redesign self-nudging. Actively changing your environment, increasing friction for bad habits, decreasing it for good ones.
Becoming your own choice architect.
And reflection feedback journaling. Documenting decisions and predictions, then comparing outcomes to learn your patterns.
Creating your own feedback loop.
And the overall goal, not bias eradication, but systematically reducing bias impact through ongoing practice.
This really is your comprehensive toolkit for taking control and continuously improving. Outro.
And that brings us to the end of this deep dive. It really feels like debiasing and rational self-regulation. It's part science, part art, and definitely an ongoing practice.
That's a great way to put it. The science clearly shows us biases are real, stubborn, pervasive, part of our wiring. But that same science gives us this incredible taxonomy of tools, motivational, cognitive, environmental, to systematically push back.
But the tools only work if we use them. The practice is on us.
Exactly. And that practice really rests on three pillars, three essential components for anyone serious about this. First, introspection. That honest self-awareness, recognizing your own vulnerabilities to bias.
Acknowledging the blind spot.
Second, intention. The genuine desire, the commitment to actually change how you think and act. You have to want to improve.
The motivation piece.
And third, implementation. Consistently, diligently using these techniques in real life. Not just knowing them, but doing them day in, day out. It's that systematic, iterative application that leads to real growth.
So while we might never reach that impossible ideal, perfect rationality, totally free of error, that's not really the point, is it?
Not at all. The point is, we can become systematically, demonstrably more rational than we were yesterday. We can cultivate this toolkit, make those incremental gains that add up over time.
It feels like harnessing that spirit of the Enlightenment Pinker talked about, but at the individual level?
I think that's exactly right. By deliberately applying these strategies, you're engaging in that project of correcting biases through reason, through empirical awareness, through a commitment to thinking better. And the payoff, it's huge. Making better decisions, achieving your goals more effectively.
And avoiding those failures that happen just because, as you said, we didn't know what we didn't know. Or maybe we were just tricked by our own minds.
Precisely. Armed with this knowledge, this understanding of biases, and now this actionable plan to counteract them, you're taking a massive empowering step, a step toward steering your own life with clearer eyes, a steadier hand, and definitely a sharper, more resilient mind. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of thought.